Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, January the 29th. China's official news agency has called Keir Starmer's visit a pivotal moment as the British leader met President Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. The Prime Minister has called for a more sophisticated relationship with China and then handed over a football from a recent Premier League match between Arsenal and Manchester United. Starmer, of course, being an Arsenal supporter, while she actually is a well-known football fan and a long-standing United supporter. A football. I wonder which cupboard that'll be stored in.
Along with all the other gifts, but it is a trophy of sorts. I have some China-style propaganda for all of our listeners this morning. What a segue. We also got a trophy last night, courtesy of the Political Podcast Awards. Sam and I delighted to be among the winners at last night's ceremony for the best format podcaster in politics. So thank you to the judges, to in-house, and to everyone who listens and made that possible. We are looking forward to showing off our trophy.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Right, back to the substance, back to Beijing and back to President Xi with Keir Starmer.
The substance of their conversation, which lasted an hour and 20 minutes, not yet known in detail, but the trip has had formal blessing from the state media. The Xinhua agency welcomed the shift in approach from what it called the ideological apprehension previously, and then added a bit acidly, we thought, for Britain, especially post-Brexit, strategic isolation from one of the world's most dynamic and influential economies is no longer an option. But anyway, you're welcome, Keir Starmer.
Yeah, thanks, guys. President Xi opened the meeting with his own attack on the Tories. I was listening to the footage and the recording earlier this morning, and President Xi said, in previous years, our relations went through twists and turns, and it did not serve the interests of our two countries. Right now, the world is both flawed and turbulent. But for the sake of world peace and stability, or our two economies, it is imperative to strengthen dialogue and relations. Take that, Rishi Sunak.
Well, indeed, that would not be lost on Keir Starmer. Also, the Prime Minister hasn't forgotten his vow. Every minute spent not talking about the cost of living is the wasted minute, says old Keir proverb. He told President Xi that events abroad affect everything that happens in our home countries. Prices on the supermarket shelves to how secure we feel. So he's still keeping that eye on the audience back home.
Yeah, it's just worth pointing out, Anne, that in the last budget, Britain actually raised the cost of certain goods from China. We're raising barriers to goods from China, and we're raising the cost of goods from China. And that was what's known as the de minimis rule. Basically, at the moment, there was a tax exemption, a tariff exemption on small things coming from China, from basically cheap shops like Temu that export stuff directly to the UK, and that exemption's being scrapped. So sort of cheap electricals and cheap goods from China are about to go up in cost. So I'd nuance the Prime Minister's claim that he's keeping supermarket prices down through relations with China, because actually policy does actually push in the other direction.
That was a really good spot in the way that policy just quite often faces in two directions when it comes on trade with China, Sam. But overall, let's say we do expect deals with China and Britain to be announced to show the relationship has improved, and not just in buying and selling terms. So the first sign of this would be a new border security pact intended to disrupt supply of small boat engines. That's been on the table in the talks in the run-up. Last year, more than 60% of engines used by the smuggling gangs were found to be branded as being from China. The government has also said that it's looking for agreement to scale up removals of those with no right to be in the UK and intensify work with China to crack down on synthetic opioids. But it is an uncomfortable reminder that a lot of problem areas for the UK have been tolerated and in some cases pushed at arm's length, no doubt, but still pushed with the say-so or blind eye of the leadership in Beijing.
Yeah, well, let's see whether the meeting with Xi will advance things. I was studying the video footage of the bilateral meeting that took place in the early hours of the morning. I do find these things fascinating because you have big delegations around a huge table on both sides. And it always fascinates me who we bring to these things, because Keir Starmer sits in the middle, and you could see Peter Carl, the business secretary, at his side. Jonathan Powell, the national security advisor, was there too. And I think it was the new Beijing ambassador, although I don't know him by sight, who was right next to the PM. I couldn't see the Treasury Minister, Lucy Rigby. Maybe she was out of shot, but in Rachel Reeves' absence, I didn't think she was around the big table. But I was quite fascinated. We also put, at a gathering like that, mid-level press people. I'm quite sure that the Chinese aren't bringing people like that. So I wonder whether they actually contribute to the dialogue. I somehow think not. The truth is that what looked like business as usual on the Chinese side is anything but, though. And I don't know whether you've been following events in Beijing over the last few days. I'm sure you have. But China's actually been rocked by one of its biggest political scandals in years, with a purge of its top general, Zhang Yuzhou, over the weekend. And he's been purged and there are various rumours. One is that he was leaking nuclear secrets to the United States. Another rumour is that he was plotting a coup. Him and President Xi go back decades. And the other was factional infighting. And there were even, according to political scientists, there was a political scientist quoted in Singapore by the New York Times, rumours of a gunfight in Beijing. So, all smiles and business as normal with Keir Starmer. I'm not sure that the British visit was quite top of President Xi's priority list.
Well, it's even more exciting than what's been going on in British politics in about the last week. Yes, Zhang, my colleagues who've dealt with China for years, also saying it's a fascinating removal, but it's also... he was also someone who kept very close relationships with the West, and that will be amiss, in terms of keeping the relationship going when all this flummery is over. So in terms of what you were spotting with your eagle eye there, our Dan Bloom from Politico, who's along for the ride, telling us that at the top table with the PM in that golden red room, the famous Great Hall of the People, Varun Chandra, who missed out narrowly on the ambassadorship to the US, but is given a really amped up role there at the top table of international relations. He's there along with the Deputy Chief of Staff, Vijay Alexander. The new ambassador is Peter Wilson. I've known on and off for years. He was around in number 10 and some of what the Chinese describe as the turbulent years of the Tories, but he's also Mandarin speaker, and he's had postings there before, so that is very important to the UK to have got him into place. He certainly is along there. Politically, I think you'd have to say it's going to plan so far for Keir, wouldn't you? I mean, China's president swiping at the Tory predecessors, saying the relations had gone through twists and turns that didn't serve the interests of our countries, and praising Labour governments of the past for important contributions to the growth of the relationship. He even wheeled out one of those useful Chinese proverbs, range far your eye over long distances, which must be quite nice to have if you're a prime minister who's been enduring turmoil inside your own party and trying to show that it's really your hand on the tiller and that your eye is ranged over the long distance.
Range your eye over long distances is basically the motto for this podcast when we begin prepping at 5 every morning. I just want to pull the camera back a little bit further, because there are quite a lot of signs globally right now of broader instability. The Daily Mail, of all people, has a rare front page on foreign affairs. Countdown to conflagration is the banner headline, of course, referring to what's going on potentially between the US and Iran. Donald Trump talking up his beautiful armada, Tehran saying that any attack would be an act of war. Before we meet again on Monday, Anne, do you think we could get a US attack on Tehran, a nuclear disarmament deal, or neither? What's going to happen?
Oh, great. Thank you for that one. Prognostication is a specialism. So Donald Trump definitely amping up the pressure on Iran. He was highlighting yesterday a massive armada that he said he had deployed to the region to force Tehran to the bargaining table there over a deal that would end its nuclear weapons program. So that is sounding punchy. Social media posts from Donald Trump have also been moving up the threat scale, so that's always an indicator to watch. The EU, as it happens, also hardening a line they're listing the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation, which is interesting in the UK sense, Sam, because it's much closer to the approach that Tony Blair's been making for handling Iran, going much more frontal diplomatically, where we have tended to stick out against prescribing this organisation, partly for symbolic reasons, and I suspect also for intelligence ones. But when you say there's one of three options, what's going to happen? I mean, I suppose I would probably price at the lower side an all-out deal. I just can't quite see Tehran being at the moment in the mood to come to the table on that, but they could say they were prepared to start talks or something like that. The hardest thing here is to predict what Donald Trump would do. And here's a really interesting and in some ways disturbing straw in the wind from my Politico colleagues in Brussels, a reporting team there who have a really well-sourced story with 5 prime sources that Slovakia's prime minister told other EU leaders only last week that a recent meeting with Trump had left him shocked about the president's state of mind, and saying that he was worried about Donald Trump's psychological state, and used the word dangerous to describe it when he saw Trump at Mar-a-Lago very recently. That is now denied by Fico, but the sourcing is pretty solid, and it does indicate that not only are there difficult choices here on the table about Iran, but that it's been a bit bubbling under. Is Trump just being Trump here in terms of his messaging, or is he genuinely getting more erratic? And a lot depends on that all around the world.
Crikey, that's incredible. So 5 sources told Politico that the Slovakia Prime Minister talked about Trump's psychological state and used the word dangerous, even if it is denied. I think interesting that you guys have the confidence to do that, and we will remember that story. That's quite something.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to flutter the hen coop, that story. It's worth a read from Brussels. But, it has been around from Davos onwards, and so it's out there now. So let's see what the reaction is. Back to you.
Okay, that's a good point to leave it on international affairs. Let's return rapidly to the domestic front. There's a story around today which sort of catches up with something we've been saying quite consistently, which is the assisted dying legislation is itself basically dying, it seems to me, at least in its current form.
Well, indeed. And a reminder of where we are on that tangled tale. Changes are in a private member's bill, independent of the government. It's currently in the House of Lords, but it needs to become law before May in this session of Parliament. And there's a King's Speech. Otherwise, it simply falls. It runs out of time. Now, according to an analysis by the Hansard Society, the bill is likely to need at least 16 more sitting days, even to reach the end of committee stage. It has less than half of that time available. And frankly, there was just so much in this bill that where agreement was not able to be found or to be moved along, that it does seem to have ended up being a scrambled attempt to bring in assisted dying.
And the backers of the bill, Lord Faulkner in particular, quite agitated this morning. He's out and about in the papers on the BBC. Some of the backers are suggesting that if it falls, they could use the Parliament Act to get it over the heads of the objections in the Lords. Although not only is this very, very rare, I think the Parliament Act's only been used once in the last few decades. But there's just a feeling amongst parts of the Labour Party that they want this whole issue to just go away again. I was with one minister yesterday who voted for assisted dying, who said just the process was the most difficult and unpleasant thing that they'd done since the election, and they never wanted to think about it again.
And also a lot of prominent people, I'm thinking people like Wes Streeting, Shabana Mahmood and Camp, who just don't want it at all. And the idea of then taking that vibe about a very difficult subject in every sense, morally, sensitively, practically, and then sort of trying to ram it through, I have to say, I don't think that is very likely at all. So there are reports this morning. The alternative is, kick it off to a royal commission, which frankly you could have done in the first place, and just kind of. But here we are. It is of course feasible that there's another bill in the next session, and MPs do it again. Supporters, Lord Faulkner, you mentioned, they're extremely cross. They think that a minority of lords shouldn't be used to use procedural measures to block the law. You can see their point of view, but somehow this is where we've ended up. What do you reckon?
Well, I think there's another curveball, and it's linked to Keir Starmer's future. Yes, the bill is on the ropes, but if there's a leadership contest, well, all the main contenders currently in Parliament are against it. And it's the names you just mentioned: Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, Shabana Mahmood. They all voted against assisted dying. And, some of those names have pretty strong views against it. Andy Burnham said that had he been in Parliament, he would have voted for it, but that's less relevant after the events of last weekend. So that just feels like a pretty much insoluble problem if there's a change of leadership in the Labour Party.
Good point. Something else that's big in the Times this morning, another reversing round the curve exercise from the government, reporting the Prime Minister is shelving fresh plans to overhaul benefits. There's a battle in government for bills to get into the King's Speech. They say that Pat McFadden, the Work and Pension Secretary, has not got a slot for any welfare legislation in the next session. So that would mean, another delay of another year before we got round to anything on welfare reform. ... If true, and if that is indeed the case, that is where Pat McFadden is at the moment.
When this story dropped last night from the Times, and one minister said, well, it's over, as in Keir Starmer's premiership is over, which of course is a little bit OTT, but there is this growing sense that we've talked about that he can't get anything through Parliament if it means a row with his own side. And one person was saying to me yesterday, the best argument for a change of leader is to have somebody who can handle Parliament better than Keir Starmer and his team in number 10, which is pretty brutal. This story is quite nuanced about the welfare bill, so it's worth pointing out. The truth is that the lack of slot means that you're unlikely to get legislation introduced before late 2027. Fine, that's when the next session is and what the King's Speech will determine. But it's not impossible to do it. You don't do it automatically, but it's not impossible. It's just not clear to me that the government was going to be able to do it in that time frame anyway. There are two reviews on welfare going on at the moment, the Timms review and the Milburn review, and they would start to report this summer, but then they'd have to draw up legislation. That was going to take time after the mess of last year. So I felt that we were not that far away from the timetable being on that scale already.
So yeah, it certainly something could still go ahead. I think that is worth saying. And as I've understood it from talking to people who've been very passionate about welfare reform for years, they see this route through the Timms review and the Milburn reviews, doing that pitch rolling, preparing opinion, making arguments with the backbenchers, which clearly were not made when the whole first welfare reform bill dramatically crashed and burned. But it is still a bit tricky. I think if you're Pat McFadden and you're seen as a doer, the whole point of putting him into that role was to say you were moving on with something that really matters, is core to what Labour wants to do in office. It just feel like we're now getting there with the policies of small steps, as the Germans say of such things. But small steps take a long time, and the government is burning through its time in office. To your point about relations around it, I was talking to one very prominent MP in this and other debates who said last night to me, we had a chance to sell welfare reform the first time. We didn't take it, and that it still had some concerns about the relations between the centre and the roles of those who look after the politics of these things in and around number 10, that they felt that they were still not getting the amount of sort of catch up and information that you would need just to keep MPs invested in these kind of big reform topics.
Everything is measured in terms of the strength of the Prime Minister at the moment before you even get to substance. But listen, you talked about burning through time. We managed to burn through time every morning really quickly. And we will burn our listeners if we go on any further, because I've had a message from producer Evan, co-award winner of our Gong from last night, saying it's time for us to shut up. So shut up, we will. It's a 3-day weekend for us. We'll be back on Monday with Politics at Sam and Anne's. Have a great time, and we will see what state the world is in then.
Yeah, we'll just spend the whole weekend just staring at our reward. Did we mention that? Award. See you on, humble brag, see you on Monday.